When it finally opened, it was the longest bridge in the world, and half the city was terrified to walk across it. People were certain it would tear loose from its towers and drop them all into the river below. The man who had spent his life building it watched the celebration through a telescope from his bedroom window. Because his body was so broken, he could no longer leave the house. He would, by most accounts, never once set foot on the bridge. He gave everything to create. And the person who had truly carried the work across the finish line for the last 11 years was someone whose name appeared on not a single official plan. This is the story of a bridge that demanded a price from one family across 3 generations, and the quiet hero history almost forgot. Built by people who believed it could be done. To understand the bridge, you have to understand the river it crossed. In the 1800s, 2 of the most crowded, ambitious cities in America sat facing each other across a wide, fast, dangerous stretch of water, joined only by ferries that froze in winter and capsized in storms. A bridge between them seemed the obvious answer. It also seemed, to almost everyone, completely impossible. The span was far too wide. No one had ever built anything like it. Many called the whole idea a kind of madness. One man did not. He was a brilliant, iron-willed engineer who had spent his career building suspension bridges that others swore would never hold, and he had a radical new design and a new material in mind that he believed could leap the river in a single span. He fought for years to convince the city to let him try, and just as the project was finally approved, before a single stone had been laid, fate struck the first terrible blow. While he was surveying the exact spot for one of the towers, his foot was crushed in a freak accident at the water's edge. Within weeks, he was dead. The visionary who dreamed the bridge would never see even its beginning. Now, before this story goes on, hold a question. When we finally credit the people who build our greatest landmarks, whose name truly belongs on it, the one who designs it and dreams it, the one who suffers and bleeds to construct it, or the one nobody planned for, who steps into the gap and carries it home. Hold that thought. By the end, you may find the obvious answer is the wrong one. The dead man's son took up the work. He was an accomplished engineer in his own right, hardened by war, and he threw himself into the most dangerous part of the entire project. To anchor the great towers, the foundations had to be dug far below the surface of the river. Workers descended into vast sealed wooden chambers, pumped full of compressed air to hold back the water so they could dig at the very bottom of the riverbed. No one yet understood what that pressure did to the human body. Men who came up too quickly were struck down by a strange and agonizing sickness, their joints seizing. Some left paralyzed, a number of them lost altogether. They called it caisson disease. Today we call it the bends. The son, to keep up the spirits of his crews, insisted on spending more time in those chambers than almost anyone. And the sickness took him. One day he was carried out unconscious and nearly died. He survived, but he was never the same again. Partly paralyzed, in chronic pain, at times unable to speak above a whisper or bear light on his eyes, he became an invalid before the bridge was even half built. Built by people who believed it could be done, even as it broke their bodies one by one. He could have given up the role. The city pressured him to, but he refused to abandon his father's work, and so he directed the entire rest of the construction from his sickbed, watching through a telescope at his window. And here is the turn that makes this story unforgettable. The messages, the orders, the answers to 1,000 engineering crises on that bridge, all of them had to pass through one person who sat at his bedside, listened, learned, and carried his will to the men on the towers. That person was his wife. With her husband unable to work, she taught herself the higher mathematics of the bridge, the strength of materials, the behavior of cables under tension, the intricate calculations that held the whole impossible thing together. For 11 years, she crossed back and forth between the sick room and the construction site, relaying instructions, answering questions, facing down contractors and skeptical engineers who slowly realized that the person who truly understood every detail of this bridge was standing right in front of them. When officials moved to remove her husband as chief engineer, she stood before a room of powerful men and argued his case, and won. Earlier, I asked you whose name truly belongs on this bridge. Sit with it now, because thoughtful people genuinely divide here. Some say it will always be the father's bridge, the dreamer who designed it and died for it. Others say it belongs to the son, who traded his health to build it. And more people now argue it belongs above all to the wife, who turned herself into an engineer when the men around her fell and carried it the final hardest distance. Where do you stand? Tell me, because for 100 years the official record gave her almost nothing. When the great day came, it was she who rode in the first carriage across the finished bridge, carrying a rooster on her lap as an ancient symbol of victory. Below her stretched the longest span on earth, hung from steel that her husband's father had pioneered, anchored in foundations that had cost her husband his health, completed under her own patient hand. Within days, a panicked rumor that the bridge was collapsing set off a deadly crush of bodies among the crowds. So deep ran the fear that something this large could not possibly stand. But it stood. It has stood now for more than 140 years. If your sense of who built this bridge shifted someplace in the last few minutes, you are far from alone, because we are still, even now, learning to say her name aloud. Tell me where you landed. What lingers is not the steel or the stone. It is the truth that some of the greatest things we have ever made were not built by a single genius at all, but carried across years and across generations by people who simply refused to let the work die with them. A father gave the dream. A son gave his body. A woman gave the knowledge no one expected her to have. 3 lives poured into one, crossing over a river so that a city could finally be made whole. The knowledge was never lost. It is holding tens of thousands of people above the water at this very moment. It was built by people who believed it could be done, and that's worth remembering. If stories like this one stay with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we bring one more lost machine back to life and tell you the story the history books left out.